Our opening words are a reading by Martha Kirby Capel. As we enter this sacred, silent space, let us renew both our commitment and our covenant. There are those among us who have endured loss in the past week. May their hope be uplifted again in this community of faith. There are those among us who have struggled with hardship in the past week. May they find renewed strength in this community of faith. There are those among us who have wrestled with questions that seem to have no answer in the past week. May they find sanctuary during their search in this community of faith. There are those among us who have cherished an unexpected joy in the past week. May their rejoicing be celebrated in this community of faith. As we commit to continue our free and responsible search for truth, may we covenant to honor the many paths that have led us to this community of faith. So may it be.
I wonder what might be in the Wonderbox today, and would someone like to open it? Next week. Okay. Holly actually helped with part of this. Do you want to open it up? Oh my gosh. Would you look at this? Can you sit down again? Thank you. What is this? Can anyone see from back there? Jenga? Okay, so this is like our community. Let me see if I can do this. See if we can pick our community up. Jeez. Oh no, here we go. So if you all could just help me a little bit with this. I'm seeing a lot of different words down here. So how many of you like playing Jenga? Jenga, yeah? What's the goal of the game? I failed. But what happens once you inevitably make the tower fall? You rebuild it, and you get to play again. If you don't get too mad at your siblings, yes. Now, there's a lot of writings on these words. Do you see any on these little blocks? What do you see? Some words there. Love. Oh, that's a good one. New beginnings, joy, nature, life. Oh man, my penmanship has gotten good. Nourishment, excellent. So, and when you take some of these pieces out, sometimes they become a little more top heavy than we intended. You know, if you take out the middle one, then you still have those other two, but if you take out the outside two, we're getting a little dangerous here. Holly, what's that middle one you have? What's that middle one? What's on that? It's blank? What does that mean? Okay, so maybe sometimes we're not exactly sure if there's another one. Can you think of a word that would be good for this community, Holly? Mad. Okay. Well, sometimes we do get mad, and what's really important, what? And sometimes we get angry, and one of the great things about covenant is it gives us a path back to one another, back to our community, and to the love that we might share. And also sometimes there's people who are new, or perhaps even this is their first day, and they bring with them their own pieces that we might not have even known we needed for this covenant that we have. Now, what we're going to do in a second is remember that the covenant looks great as this Jenga puzzle, but most of the time it doesn't just sit here. We engage it. We engage our covenant, the promises we make to each other. We play the game, and we get to a point where we need to come back together. We need to renew our covenant. And so that's what we're going to be talking about a bit today. As from what I hear, there might be some ice cream making going on with the youth. So short straw. But what we're going to do is, as you go out, can you each take like a handful and maybe pass them to just people you walk by, or hand them to someone on the end, and then we can pass them down the row so that we all have a little something as a part of this covenant. All right? So we're going to sing you out to your classes today. Let us sing.
conflicted? Be brave and curious. I have an admission. I have been afraid of conflict. Even in simple conversations with friends or family, I have taken to heart the adage, don't discuss politics or religion. That fear probably goes back to childhood memories of adult dinner table debates among my parents and my paternal grandparents. For years afterwards, any voice raised loudly in stubborn adherence to opinion would make me want to leave the scene. For a long time also, I felt uncomfortable when visiting any other family whose normal operating mode included strident rulings from the mother or father to their children, and the emotional, dramatic pleadings they received in response. This was shocking to me. Nobody dared talk back to my father. It took me a while to realize that in some ethnic cultures and even branches of my own extended family, loud interplay was normal and did not mean love was missing. Movies and television sitcoms contributed evidence to alter my perspective also. Other families, fictional or real, became fascinating for me to observe. Fascination can spread to interfaith relationships too. I should be curious, and instead of feeling conflicted about what to say or do in a mixed religious group, I should be brave. We are, after all, supposed to be taking courageous action, right? I found a few thoughts from published authors to push me in that direction. Kirsten Siggins wrote something titled The Power of Curiosity, How to Have Real Conversations That Create Collaboration, Innovation, and Understanding. I have not read this book, but I imagine it is aimed toward business and management. Even so, she makes a statement that matches what I have seen in human behavior. Quote, when we aren't curious in conversations, we judge, tell, blame, and even shame, often without even knowing it, which leads to conflict, unquote. I experienced this hard lesson once or twice when working in a customer service role, but that haunting memory should not freeze me from future interactions. I need to grow and become my best by bravely staying connected. Alaric Hutchinson, author of Living Peace, says, bravery is the choice to show up and listen to another person, be it a loved one or perceived foe, even when it is uncomfortable, painful, or the last thing you want to do, unquote. I am learning that avoidance and disengagement do no good for anybody, including myself. And what about my expectations when interacting with our interfaith partners? Am I ready to embrace our differences and savor them? Am I ready to, author Steve Goodyear, who wrote 1 Minute Can Change a Lifetime, reminds us that, quote, we don't get harmony when everybody sings the same note. Only notes that are different can harmonize. The same is true for people, unquote. Imagine how boring life would be if we all thought the same thoughts and did the same things. Being brave and curious are qualities that can make our lives more interesting and meaningful. Being brave and curious is one way to build bridges.
We have two readings. First is a poem by Francis Kojar, When Covenant Breaks. When covenant breaks, hope flickers and doubt seeps in like floodwaters through the cracks in the basement. While the many return to the comforts of their congregation, we are left staring at the door that was slammed in our faces, wondering if we should walk back in and why. Our faith demands growth, demands inclusion. It demands of those who never were like us, whatever side of that us you fall on. But words can so easily be cast aside in that moment when they matter. Covenant is a promise that we will work together on a team we did not choose. Doing group work, we like the idea of far more than the thing itself. It is the radical answer to a radical goal, at least on paper. For our faith does not give us answers for what to do when covenant breaks, when we see that some would rather cling to their patriarchy and their white supremacy, would make problem people of the whistleblowers and hateful radicals of those just asking for rights, would pretend that the promises of covenant mean nothing unless the person is just like you. But then standing in that cold with that door slammed in front of you, something shifts. Covenant is a promise between the people of this faith, but it is also a promise between ourselves and our faith. And sometimes nothing takes more faith than staying. Choosing to speak of your broken heart to those who are brave enough to face change, to stay in dialogue, and have those hard conversations you never wanted to have, and choosing to be angry rather than walk away. All of these are holding true to your promises. When covenant breaks, we are sent back to the beginning, again, like a toddler on their timeout to think about what just happened, or a minister on their sabbatical, called to remember what we fell in love with in the first place. This ship is not sinking. It is only rocked by the violent waves of oppression, and everyone has contributed to the oppression of someone, if not everyone. May that humility keep us listening, even when our own pain hasn't been heard yet, even when our relationships are shattering like crystals falling to cold stone, even when all you need is a hug and your community won't open its arms yet. When covenant breaks, we need to come home, to trust that there are others out there who would have supported you if they were only there, and to trust that our faith will always be here tomorrow, bound by nothing more or less than the promises made by people willing to fight like a golden web glimmering with dew in the first light of morning, because when covenant breaks, it is a tear merely in a web, still holding strong. And as long as we believe in ourselves and in the greatness that we could become together, then we can always come back tomorrow, roll up our sleeves, and start weaving again.
Our second reading is A Covenant Invites Relationship by Lisa Ward. A covenant is not a definition of a relationship. It is the framework for our relating. A covenant leaves room for chance and change. It is humble toward evolution. It claims, I will abide with you in this common endeavor, be present as best I can in our becoming. This calls for a level of trust, courage, and sacrifice that needs to be nurtured, renewed, and affirmed on a regular basis. A creed creates a static truth, something that does not incorporate new insights and realities. A covenant is a dance of co-creation, keeping in step with one another in the flow of our lives. A creed seeks uniformity and a unison voice. A covenant seeks harmony and a shared voice. Sometimes we may arrive at a unison, but it is not required. A creed gives authority to the statement. A covenant gives authority to shared intention. A creed creates an us and them. A covenant invites relationship. A creed is a prescription that must be relied on. A covenant relies on the treasures of shared truth. The overall trust within this covenant is in the truth, capital T, something which no one person can fully see, yet something which each and every person can come to know in glimpses, in another's story, in epiphanies. Truth is ever changing in our seeking to understand because of our limited perspectives. We grow into a deeper sense of the meaning of all things when we take our journey seriously with full heart and mind. The courage within this covenant is in the acceptance and celebration of life, and with all its challenges, pain, ironies, and joys. And the sacrifice within this covenant is in the letting go of dogma, of assumptions, of control, and giving over to a greater wisdom which comes to us in bits and pieces. The task of this covenant is to take responsibility for the freedom we espouse. We know that we are interconnected and know what we do creates ripples of hope or despair, of affirmation or negation. What we do with and for another is powerful and beyond our imagining.
Many Unitarian Universalists struggle at times with describing to non-UUs what this faith tradition is all about. Is that difficulty familiar to any of you, even this morning, perhaps? Oftentimes, I believe this challenge comes from a lack of clarity of what lies beneath the question we're being asked. For example, how many of you have interacted with a non-UU, let's say a Christian perhaps, as our wider community is predominantly Christian, and in such a conversation, if with your family member, friend, colleague, neighbor, stranger, etc., if they learn that you are a Unitarian Universalist, the following question is something like this. Well, what does that mean? Or, well, what do UUs believe? In that moment, we have an opportunity to answer the question that is being asked of us in either the method and formula expected by the questioner, or we are able to answer in a way that feels true and authentic and meaningful to us. Let me explain. In Western religion, specifically in Christianity, religion is defined by orthodoxy. You familiar with that word, orthodoxy, which comes from the Greek ortho, meaning right or correct, and doxa, which means opinion or way. Orthodoxy is about an articulation of the right belief or opinion. Religions that are orthodoxic are organized around a series of beliefs deemed right and true. And this understanding of religion is clearly the waters we swim in because we need not look any further than what we feel compelled, how we feel compelled to respond when asked what is Unitarian Universalism. Namely, that we are asked to respond with orthodoxy. Spoiler, we do not have orthodoxy. The true translation of this perennial question of what is Unitarian Universalism is actually this. This is what we are likely being asked. How does Unitarian Universalism fit within my understanding of religion, namely those shaped by orthodoxy? And so, as I said, Unitarian Universalists do not start from a place of orthodoxy or right belief. Rather, we start from an entirely different vantage point, which is something known as orthopraxy, or orthopraxy. You might hear similarity between the two words, orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Well, like orthodoxy, orthopraxy is focused on what might be considered right or true, correct, or straight, which is that Greek root ortho. The difference comes in the second half of the term, orthopraxy or praxy. This part of the word also comes from the Greek through the word praxis, meaning a doing, an action, or a performance. So taken together, orthopraxy means right action or correct practice. Now, if you're still awake after this walk down etymological lane, this matters because, as I said before, when most folks think of religion or come to meet you or someone who is Unitarian Universalist, they're often looking for and expecting a tradition rooted in orthodoxy rather than orthopraxy. Sometimes we feel trapped and feel the need to try to fit Unitarian Universalism into an orthodoxic understanding of religion. One example might be the common refrain that all UUs are afforded: a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Kind of an open-minded sense of orthodoxy, that truth is in the eye of the beholder. Right belief is afforded to all. But sometimes we find the courage to acknowledge that our religion is different than what most people in the West are familiar with, which we might frame it in this way. As Unitarian Universalists, we focus less on what we believe and more about the shared values by which we live our lives. Amen. Yes, that is an answer as well. Nearly 450 years apart, actually, two religious leaders offered similar sentiments in our tradition. Francis David, the leader of the Hungarian Unitarian Church 450 years ago, in the second half of the 16th century, is often attributed to have said, quote, "We need not think alike to love alike. We need not think alike to love alike." In more recent years, former UUA president, the Reverend Peter Morales, often reflected and mused that we should lead with our commitments, not our beliefs. In other words, as President Morales would encourage, quote, "Don't tell me about what you believe, tell me about what you love." Don't tell me about what you believe, tell me about what you love. By shifting from passive belief to active love, we are more accurately articulating what is at the heart of our shared UU faith. Or to uplift a verse from the Christian scriptures, "You will know us, Unitarian Universalists, by our actions." Okay, so this is important setup for the work and for the practice that we have, in part because, one, we are not the only orthopraxic religion out there, and two, we need to create space for religious differences in our minds, in our congregations, on this interfaith campus, in the various cities that we live, and across this region and world. Because what happens inevitably is that when orthodoxy clashes with orthopraxy, let alone orthodoxy with orthodoxy, a natural conflict arises. Cynthia spoke to this conflict that many of you may have felt as well as children. Even in simple conversations, she had to admit that she became afraid of conflict as a young person. For years afterwards, she said, "A voice raised loudly in stubborn adherence to opinion would make me want to leave the scene," end quote. But then she admitted another discovery, and I was grateful she got here at the end of her reflection about both the monotony and harmony we can experience in this life. Quote, "Imagine how boring life would be if we all thought the same thoughts and did the same things. Being brave and curious are qualities that can make our lives more interesting and meaningful. Being brave and curious is one way to build bridges, end quote. My friends, as Unitarian Universalists, we are well positioned to not only build bridges across differences, but to support our own and other people's navigation of conflict. As an orthopraxic living tradition, one rooted in action and commitment, we are predisposed and have great tools before us to facilitate, mediate, and articulate the importance of neither avoiding conflict, which is impossible, or, as Cynthia suggested, leave the scene altogether. Indeed, we have a special tool to help us all get to the table and stay at the table, even as conflict and or conflicted feelings within oneself arise. And what is that? Covenant. Ding, ding, ding. It's the word of the day. I wish we had the noises and stuff. We'll budget for it. Covenant is our liberal religious inheritance, along with freedom, reason, and reverence. Covenant is to orthopraxy as creed is to orthodoxy. A creed is a set of beliefs to which a group of people would agree. A covenant, in contrast, is a set of commitments, promises, actions to which a group of people would agree. Now, this is simplifying complex layers of religion, whether those rooted in orthodoxy or orthopraxy, but it is a helpful distinction when thinking about navigating conflict within and beyond our Unitarian Universalist community. Our first reading, or our second reading, which Cynthia shared, offered some contrast between creeds and covenants. Lisa Ward, the writer, wrote this, quote, "A creed creates a static truth, something that does not incorporate new insights and realities, whereas a covenant is a dance of co-creation, keeping in step with one another in the flow of our lives. A creed seeks uniformity and a unison voice. A covenant seeks harmony and a shared voice. Sometimes we may arrive at a unison, but it is not required. A creed gives authority to the statement. A covenant gives authority to shared intention. A creed creates an us and a them. A covenant invites relationship. A creed is a prescription that must be relied on. A covenant relies on the treasures of shared truth." Now, laying out these descriptions of creed and covenant is done with two big caveats. First, most religions have some or even quite a bit of overlap between creed and covenant. In other words, exclusively orthodoxic or orthopraxic religions are hard to come by. And second, these two foundational qualities of religion are not meant to be seen as hierarchical, one better than the other. In other words, orthopraxis religions are not inherently better, more ethical than orthodoxic religions and vice versa. Instead, it is intended to show that as Unitarian Universalists, as practitioners of the liberal and liberating living tradition that this is, we have some important tools that we can and must utilize, refine, and share with one another, our interfaith partners, and the world. Covenant, as stated above, is shaped by words and phrases like, quote, creation, harmony, intention, relationship, and shared truth, end quote. But what happens when we stumble into our own humanness and experience the opposite, quote, destruction, disharmony, indifference, division, or irreconcilable truths? One might say the strength of being an orthopraxic religious tradition is found exclusively in the promises we make to and uphold with one another. However, the true strength comes from our ability to return to right relationship after our covenants are broken, after the Jenga tower falls, after our relationships have been damaged, or after we have been hurt or have hurt one another. In other words, we know that we are a covenant-making community rooted in promise and right action. And we cannot deny that we do miss the mark as humans and as societies. And as such, we are a covenant breaking community. The beauty comes in our capacity to be a covenant renewing people. In our second reading this morning, Canadian Unitarian author and poet Frances Kozier describes what happens when covenant breaks. Here's some of the things she says. When covenant breaks, hope flickers and doubt seeps in like floodwaters through the cracked skin of the basement, through the cracks in the basement. End quote. Thank you. We live in a world where covenants are breaking each day, but also infinite more are not being mended and restored from the past. Bridge building is in this sense, not just when an incident occurs and immediate action is needed to return to our interdependence and shared humanity. Bridge building also, and perhaps most commonly, is about renewing covenants long broken, relationships among people, communities, religions, races, etc., long damaged, often seemingly beyond repair with every passing year. And thus our bridging from what is to what once was, or may yet still be, is complicated by so many factors of additional harm, compounded harm or entrenchment on either side of the river. Covenant, though, also grants us opportunities for pause and consideration, to consider what we have and what we may have lost along the way. The pause gives us time to return to the beginning and to remember the origins of our love for one another and the longing we feel to begin again in that love. Kozier writes, when covenant breaks, we are sent back to the beginning again, like a toddler in their time out to think about what just happened, or a minister on their sabbatical called to remember what we fell in love with in the first place. When we return to our sides of the river, we have space to know deep in our bones that often what is broken is not lost, that healing is a part of the miracle of existence, that life seeks out life, love longs for love, and we all gravitate towards those things that remind us of and uplift our shared humanity and divinity. The practice of this faith, the work of Unitarian Universalism, is the work of returning to the love and wholeness of our births and the beginning of all that was, is, and ever will be. Indeed, our ministry here and our interfaith bridge building is a perennial process of coming home, a weekly, a daily process of coming back home. Kozier reflects this sentiment, offering this final encouragement to the work before us, saying, when covenant breaks, we need to come home to trust that there are others out there who would have supported you if they were only there, and to trust that our faith will always be here tomorrow, bound by nothing more or less than the promises made by people willing to fight like a golden web glimmering with dew in the first light of morning. Because when covenant breaks, it is a tear, merely in a web still holding strong, and as long as we believe in ourselves and in the greatness that we could become together, then we can always come back tomorrow, roll up our sleeves, and start weaving again. Friends, the Bridge Builders Summit this coming weekend is that very work. It is that very work of rolling up our sleeves and starting to weave once more. I want you to know that you are capable of miraculous acts of love and building connections, even and especially in the divided times in which we live. Truly, there is no greater time to build bridges than in the present moment. It is the only time for which we can build. So much is at stake, and yet the beauty and possibility before us should renew our sense of hope and commitment to one another, to our interfaith community, and to this aching world that is our home. Please, please, literally, not rhetorically, join me next weekend for this opportunity to learn and grow, build and rebuild the world that we dream about and know is possible. Sign up for the Bridge Builders Summit during coffee hour or when you get home later today. Believe in the promise of Unitarian Universalism and the future that is rising above the harsh waters of division and inviting us to the summit, to the summit of the future that awaits. May it be so, and amen.